episode of Research Talks, a collective of agrarian scholar activists from the South, CASAS podcast series. In this show, we dive deep into the latest research and ideas in the field of critical agrarian studies. Each episode, we bring you insights from CASA's members working at the cutting edge of their fields to help you understand the dynamics of rural and agrarian transformations under contemporary capitalism. I'm your host, Dr. Kranthi Nanduri, and today we have an exciting episode lined up as we speak about the dynamics of capitalism and rural politics in a post-land reform context of Zimbabwe. We have with us Dr. George Mudimu, who has been writing extensively on capital penetration, accumulation trajectories, and land use patterns in rural areas of Zimbabwe. Dr. George is currently associated as a researcher at German Institute of Development and Sustainability, and he's also a research associate at Marondema University of Agricultural Sciences and Technology, Zimbabwe. He has a PhD from China Agricultural University in Beijing. Welcome to the show, George.
Oh, thank you, Kranthi. Thank you so much.
So let me begin by asking you to briefly explain to our audience what Zimbabwe is like and what are the events leading up to land reforms in Zimbabwe?
Oh, okay, thank you. I think Zimbabwe is not news to many people. It's a country of about 18 million people in southern Africa, and it has a long history of liberation struggles, both against colonialism and against other forms of oppression, especially the West, issues of colonialism, economic sanction, etc. Then events leading to the land reform of 2000 were that historically were colonized and by the British, and black people were dispossessed of the land. Then in 1980 we got independence, and part of the independence agreement with the British was that we were going to do a land reform after 10 years so that the people could reclaim back their land. So that was not solved after independence. Even after the 10 years, that was not solved. Then in the 1990s, we adopted economic structural adjustment programs, which were which were sort of imposed to the government by the IMF and the World Bank. So that program led to a lot of people losing their urban jobs, as well as social pressure and economic pressure. So these are some of the events which then led to the land reform. So in short, is number one, historical land injustice from colonialism, and number two, economic strangulation by structural programs, as well as population pressure. Because during colonialism people were pushed to land which was unproductive. So those are some of the sort of basic conditions which led to the land reform of 2000, which was radical in that the people then took it upon themselves to expropriate land without compensation. Thank you.
Thank you. That is actually a very good introduction for us to understand what it is like and inroads to it. So let me then ask you my follow-up question, that how does the post-land reform context look like in Zimbabwe right now? And in one of your papers, you describe land reforms as transition without transformation. So if you could explain what that means, it would be great.
Oh, okay, thanks. So the post-land reform period, I would say probably is from 2009, 2010 up to date. So, it's been a complicated period because the idea of the land reform was that, number one, it was supposed to unlock production, since we had a lot of local players now in the industry, and also improve people's livelihoods, improve people's access to agrarian resources, and improve the standards of living for the general people. But that did not take place because we did the radical land reform, but we didn't do the agrarian reform. The agrarian, after the land reform, people had the land, but what's next after the land? People now wanted access to infrastructure, wanted access to capital, as well as many other forms of, agrarian resources, access to markets. So these have been sort of not very well structured. That's why we have seen we transitioned the land from large scale land holdings to small scale land holdings, but then there is no transformation in terms of, how different social classes. Here and there have been some success stories, but I think if you go deep, the expectation was that maybe this was going to be on a large scale, improving. We were expecting large scale improvements of standards of living, etc., and wider trickle down to the national economies. So those are some of the effects. Though in some sectors like tobacco, etc., there have been changes, but in other sectors, the changes have been very minimal.
Since you mentioned tobacco, and I know that you have written a paper on tobacco and contract farming, I would like to ask you to think a little bit more and explain to us how neoliberalism has shaped capital penetration in rural areas. Okay. And for some industries like tobacco, how do you think is the interaction between farmers and the corporates happening in Zimbabwe? And what do you think is the role of Zimbabwean government or the state in facilitating this contract farming? Do you think it is favorable to farmers, or what is the situation like?
Okay, that's a good question, Kranthi. But what I would say from the onset, the story is very variegated and very differentiated. There's no clear answer. But in terms of the role of the state, under normal circumstances, the state is supposed to protect the citizens. But then the challenge with Zimbabwe and many other developing countries is that these states have become rentier states. They sort of facilitate capital to penetrate into the countryside and expect rents or profits from the operations of capital. So the Zimbabwe state role has been mainly facilitatory. How do we see this? We see this, it enacts a lot of policies, structural instruments, which provides capital unbridled access to the countryside. Then in terms of neoliberalism is basically shaped the forms in which capital gets into the countryside. For example, the idea of contract farming is one form whereby capital, engages through contract farming, contracts farmers, buys the things. So most of the times at low prices from the farmers, and sometimes it turns the farmers into a labor class. If you look at most of the tobacco contracting farmers, most of them, they don't pay for labor. They provide inputs, they provide the market, but they don't account for family labor, and sometimes they don't provide the inputs on time, or sometimes they overprice the inputs, but then the prices remain sort of constant or even lower. So that's how I think capital has been able to penetrate the countryside, convert the rural farmers into producers, and sometimes even changes the types of crops rural farmers can grow. For example, shifting from maize to tobacco, with the expectation that then farmers would buy maize from the market. But in most cases, sometimes they don't get to buy what they want, because the tobacco trading system per se is, in auction system, you don't know how much you're getting until you go to the floors. So it's a big gamble, especially for farmers, considering that this crop takes about 11 months, from seedbed up to reaping. So it means the farmer is almost engaged in this thing for the rest of the whole year, and they're engaged in something which they don't know the outcome. So that's how I think this has increased precariety, among farmers. But at the same time, it's sort of a vicious circle, because they would have taken inputs. If they don't pay back, they get sued, all these kind of things. So I think basically it has been there to make the farmers very differentiated, considering that if you look at the tobacco price in Zimbabwe, the highest you can get is $5.20 per kilo. But if you look at the world market, it goes up to $17 a kilo without any value addition. So, so I think these are some of the challenges, yeah.
No, so as you mentioned, value chain, I think it's a problem that a lot of global south countries share. I believe that we are unable to see where the value addition is taking place and how. So there's no transparency, and it's very hard for us to understand the process. And B, I think especially for the farmers in the global south, they get a very smaller share of it, or a negligible share of it, at the cost of working for a longer hours and taking huge risks. So I think this is one thing we share. And I believe, and I think I share your views when you mentioned that it's under neoliberalism, this is worsening. And yeah, so let us see how that pans out. But since you also talked about the state has always been a facilitator, right? And I would like to understand a little bit more about the political dynamics in Zimbabwe, and particularly the scenario of rural politics. What are the social movements like? How are they trying to resist some of these issues? And how are they trying to propose certain changes to the government? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And maybe for starters, Zimbabwe is a democratic, multi-party country with elections after every 5 years, so that's broadly. But in terms of rural politics, yeah, we have two types of countrysides in Zimbabwe. We have the first land from countryside in the old communal countryside. So in terms of rural politics between these two, they are not the same, but they are almost getting to be the same, because the same traditional leadership in the communal areas is the same traditional leadership in the rural, in the resettlement areas, in the fast track land reform areas. So mostly because of our liberation history, the ruling party is a large base of supporters. Why? Because our war of liberation was fought in the countryside, as well as the fact that the ruling party was the one which was largely involved in the land reform. So there is a sort of a hegemony from the ruling party. But in terms of social movements, I would want to be honest, Zimbabwe, I don't think it is a social movement base. Most of these issues, for example, bed pricing, commodity prices, they're really addressed in a sort of a popular movement. People just complain, then what? So what I think has been the biggest issue was the date of social movements after the land reform. There was no common agitation among the people. They're not even, for example, with some farmers union, but these are not sort of radical farmers union. They are sort of pro-capital farmers union, So Zimbabwe doesn't have a social movement. If it's there, then it's silent. There's no, for example, there are no farmer protests. For example, price for maize is set by the government. The price, whether it's good is bad, nobody says anything. So there's no social movement in Zimbabwe post-land reform in the countryside. If it's there, then it has to do something. But of course, here and there are few voices complaining, but I would classify this more as weapons of the weak kind of thing, not as active, organic politics. Yeah.
I see. Actually, when I was researching about Zimbabwe a little bit to understand what its structure is like economically, then I know that in GDP, Zimbabwe's agriculture is only around 4.11%, according to the recent statistics, and 26% of manufacturing, and it is services, which is largely 62%, right? And you mentioned in a previous statement that it was expected that land reforms would unlock production, right? So what do you think is the prospect for manufacturing sector in Zimbabwe? Would you think it will help accelerate rural transformations, or what are the challenges? Are they similar to other countries within Africa and Global South?
Okay, thanks. So this is a good question, but we need to take note that Zimbabwe has been under economic sanction. So those economic sanctions have led, number one, to failure by most manufacturing industries to access capital and also to access markets. And number two, there are issues of rampant corruption. So these have also affected the economy. Number three, there are issues of Zimbabwe doesn't have a currency. Economic mismanagement, economic failure. Zimbabwe doesn't have a stable currency. So that's the point. Then number four, what would I say in terms of if manufacturing can do this? Yeah, but the world has changed because of globalization. Most of these things are cheaper if they're manufactured outside. We see Chinese products, South African products. Most of these things are cheaper if they're manufactured outside. And also issues of technology, technology that we don't own the technology. So we may want to leapfrog in terms of our manufacturing, but when we don't own the technology, it means nothing. Then we also have an over-reliance on mining. Mining, we have lots of green energy minerals, lithium, blah, blah. Lithium, we also have chrome, gold, platinum. So Zimbabwe's focus mostly is on those mining sectors. Manufacturing, if you wanted to do something, the government could have prioritized it. But if you look at the budget, it's more oriented towards the extractive sector. Zimbabwe, we say we have minerals, we have this. That's what we say more. We never say we have manufacturing capacity. Publicly, I don't see them saying this. We emphasize more on our tourism, our agriculture, and our minerals, because each and every year, if there are no gases of new oil, new gas, then the government is saying nothing. It says news about new discoveries of new minerals, not opening new industries. Then another big point is the informalization of Zimbabwe's economy. The economy is highly informalized. Lots of people live on the margins. It said there's vendors, footloose vendors. There's informalization of the country. So much informalization. Informalization is not bad, but how does the state capture values created in the informal sector is a big thing. So I think then that presents challenges for sort of an agglomerated kind of manufacturing basis. So I think those are some of the challenges. Then also lack of prioritization for beneficiation in the agriculture sector. Lots of our villages produce a lot of products. In some of them, we have lots of post-harvest losses, but there are no investments towards, maybe simple things like tomato sauce plants. So those, I think, are some of the challenges. Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, what I'm trying to understand is that what do you, as a scholar of agrarian studies, propose that the government should do? What do you think that scholars should look at? And before you answer that question, I would also like to understand some of the terms that you have used in your papers, like command agriculture, right? What does that command agriculture mean? And if you can link up the theory to your suggestions on policy for Zimbabwe, what would they be?
Oh, okay, thanks. So command agriculture, the word command itself is a military term. So this was the term started to be used around 2008, but it gained prominence around 2016 again. It was an agriculture state intervention program whereby the state started to provide inputs to the farmers, and the military was involved in the distribution of those inputs, managing those kind of agricultural activities. So that agricultural activities, to the naked eyes, it would appear like it's a state-sponsored input subsidy, but it was basically a commercial contract farming, which was led by the state, supported by the military. So that's command agriculture. Then in terms of policy, what would I probably suggest? The first thing is for state leaders to accept that capitalism by its nature is out there for profits. There's need to have proper policies. We need an agriculture input subsidy program. The government needs to for example, at CADAP, the Malabo, Maputo declaration, the government needs to put at least around 10% towards agriculture, not emphasize maybe on military budget, things which are not really important. So if we want to get the best from agriculture, let's invest in the agriculture. Let's invest the 10%, for example, in agriculture. Number two, let's provide proper input subsidy program. Number three, if we want to, the government always plays around with prices. Let's put prices which take note of farmers' costs, and also the government must, in a way, because we cannot stop contract farming. A lot of people have benefited from contract farming, but the government must intervene so that the people don't get cheated from contract farming. Then more importantly, we need a lot of endogenous policies, because most of the policies are sort of imposed from the World Bank. For example, the other day, the governor said, they got a good policy from the World Bank on how to do monetary policy. We were shocked because we know the history of such institutions, sometimes not always 100% for the people. So we need endogenous policies which are formed on proper, wide consultations with the masses. So those are some of my thinking. Then we also need to know that we have to innovate, We really need local-based innovations which are then commercialized and to also support local industries. What we can produce. And also we need to reduce corruption, We need to reduce corruption. We need tax policies which support poor people. If you read a lot of our national budgets, mining companies don't pay tax, but farmers pay tax. Poor people pay tax. For every transaction you do, you pay a 2% tax, but big, rich corporates don't pay tax. So we need policies which protect the poor. And more importantly, we need a lot of state supported industries, We really need industries. Then there's also another myth that they have to formalize the informal. No need for that. They need to support the informal sector wherever they are. Why should they change them when they're already thriving? So I think the government needs to take a reality check, reduce the corruption, engage the people, be pro-poor, and more importantly, extract as much rent from the mining companies and direct these rents towards development, not towards luxuries. Those are my thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. I think we are moving to the end of this session, and I would like to answer you just one more question. Because how do you think there are other countries which are doing much better or in a right direction according to you within Africa? If you were to categorize the agrarian trajectories within Africa, can you give a brief picture? I know it's a broader question, but what do you think?
Yeah, the bad parties in Africa, there are few, but also I've experienced from elsewhere. I think in Africa, there's a country called Burkina Faso. The new president, Traore, is trying the best of local endogenous development. I've worked in Tanzania. They've lots of, find the here and there some neoliberal paths, but they do intervene. The state does intervene, especially during Magufuli's time, and now Mama Sulemi Hassan, they also intervene to support avocado farmers. We need this kind of support. Then, so Tanzania for me is on the right path, some of its agrarian policies. Burkina Faso is for me in terms of some of its economic policies. But of course, much of my kind of proper development things, I would think of China. China has done most of these things on an experimental basis. They say crossing the river by touching stones. We need governments which experiment with ideas, not like implement whole-scale things without testing them. We need the government to test things, and also need the government to trust their intellectuals. Some of these things would have written them 10, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, but we need a government which is sort of as a interconnection with the scientists. We need scientifically inspired development. Trust local scientists. Most of them, some of them even have done something for the World Bank. So government must trust local scientists. Government must go on a proper path. The government must invest in local industries, and of course reduce our import bills. That's what I think.
So would I be correct in saying that our governments should decolonize their policy making process and think
Yes.
more locally? Yeah.
Yes, they need to embrace the coloniality, because that's why we said we got for more independence. But how independent are we in terms of our economic policies, political processes? So I think they need to bring in the decoloniality. It's not yet uhuru, it's not yet independence. The struggle is to continue, and for this struggle to continue, the government needs to rethink the place of poor people, also as maybe the place for Africa in the next 20, 30 years. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we can leave with this thought that we need to struggle for independence in so many ways. And we are looking forward to yet another episode.